Internet Rights Alliance is a coalition of 9 civil society organizations based in countries across Central, East, Southern, and West Africa. The organizations are Amnesty Tech, which is the technology arm of Amnesty International, Article 19 Eastern Africa, based out of Nairobi, Kenya, Budget, which is based in Lagos, Nigeria, CIPESA, which is, as I mentioned earlier, is the collaboration on international ICT policy for East and Southern Africa, based out of Kampala, the Center for Intellectual Property and International Information Technology Law, CIPIT, based in Nairobi, Kenya, Co-Creation Hub, also Nigerian-based, the Kenya ICT Action Network, Kenyan-based, Legal Resource Center, which is based in South Africa, and Paradigm Initiative, based out of Nigeria.
Thank you, Ashna. So AIRA's vision is an Africa where digital rights are upheld in all aspects of life, in governance, and in the economy, ensuring equity and prosperity across the continent, from the north to the east, to the west, to the south, and even Central Africa. And of course, our mission at AIRA is to undertake collective interventions. And we say collective because we believe in the power of collaboration. We believe 2 are greater than 1. We believe in undertaking collective interventions, and we execute strategic initiatives to promote 4 key things. Number 1, it's on privacy and data protection. Number 2, affordability and access to the internet, which we have seen, in its various shades and forms in the last 3 days of this forum. Access to information and freedoms of assembly, expression, and the press.
So we know the who and the what. So why AIRA? Each month, more than 500 million Africans access the internet. That's more than the internet users in North America and the Middle East combined. And that number continues to grow. Nonetheless, there are challenges. As the internet and digital technologies become more and more integrated in the lives, governance, and economy of Africa and its citizens, the inequalities and challenges we face online are reflected offline. As such, AIRA's response to the opportunities and challenges of the internet and digital technologies is rooted in 4 key values: accountability, transparency, integrity, and good governance.
Okay. Using these values as a guide, the African Internet Rights Alliance undertakes collective interventions and executes strategic campaigns that 1, engage the government, 2, the private sector, 3, media, 4, civil society, and all of these stakeholders and others to institute and safeguard digital rights. Let's talk about some of the work that we've done together. By the way, when you see AIRA presented today, I'm sure some of you already know that a few months, or actually a few years, almost about 3 years of some collective work brought us from the very beginning of when we decided to start working together and today. So as an alliance, we have written and distributed key digital rights, terminology guidance to journalists, and that will be very useful at a follow-up webinar that will be announced. And we've sent joint letters to the UN and the AU Commission on Human and People's Rights regarding the use of, Kenya's Computer Misuse and Cybercrimes Act and Nigeria's Cybercrimes Act. So either something is happening in East Africa or in West Africa or in Southern Africa or in Central Africa, as long as it happens in Africa, this is something AIRA is very interested in. We've also facilitated a joint social media campaign aimed at governments who have unfairly detained journalists. This happens in a lot of our countries, and we're glad to speak to this. Supported the creation of the draft declaration of freedom of expression and access to information in Africa, and of course, engaged the media on digital rights challenges and opportunities. And like, Ashna said earlier, we have some of those media partners here with us today. covering this. And that's, of course, very important for the work that we do. One of the major things we want to do today is to introduce AIRA to you and to ask you to join this movement to establish, to advance, and to protect digital rights for all on the African continent. We want to definitely move away from the climate of fear to a climate of innovation on the continent. Our details are here. You can visit the website at AIRA.Africa. That makes it easy. AIRA, just remember AIRA, and of course it's Africa. So just put a dot and it's AIRA.Africa. Also on Twitter, we're AIRA_Africa, and you can find us on Facebook and LinkedIn as African Internet Rights Alliance. Thank you very much for listening, and we are glad to introduce AIRA to you today.
Thank you very much, Benga. Participants, now that you know who, what, and why AIRA, you are welcome to pose questions and get to know more about our history, our structure, and our work. The questions can be submitted via Twitter handle that Benga just shared using the hashtag #MeetAIRA. You are also able to share the chat function in this Zoom room, as well as raise your hand so you can be given the floor by the host.
While we wait to see if there are any questions, I'd also invite you to follow, to find us, of course, and follow us on Facebook and LinkedIn from the links that I shared earlier. From those platforms, we will share news about our latest efforts, alliance statements on key developments across the continent, and of course, very importantly, opportunities for collaboration, because we definitely look forward to working with you.
As Benga mentioned earlier on, we will be hosting a media webinar for journalists across the continent, international outlets that cover Africa, and any other journalists that are interested in covering technology. The webinar is scheduled to be hosted on Thursday, October 22nd, 2020, and it will feature panelists from Article 19, the Malawi-based Center for Human Rights and Rehabilitation, as well as Global Partners Digital. The session will explore recent developments impacting digital rights in the wake of the COVID-19 pandemic and its implications on elections, both recent and upcoming on the continent. Journalists interested in joining us in this session, please express your interest via email using info@aira.africa. So info is info at symbol AIRA, AIRA .Africa.
Thank you so much, Ashna. And a reminder, throughout this afternoon session, we are monitoring for questions and comments on Twitter via the hashtag #MeetAIRA that I've posted here also in the chat window. And we look forward to those questions. I see we have a question here, but before the question, there's a comment from Louis. Thank you, Louis. We appreciate the kind words. All of the members of AIRA are glad that we're here and that, this is an opportunity for collaboration. It can only get better from here. So we have a question here. Ashna, please go ahead.
Yes, I see a question from Isaac. Isaac, if you could bear with us, we'll respond to the questions. That question a bit later after introducing our panelists. We have a lineup of panelists who are going to share a bit more than Benga and I have shared in the presentations. We will now ask our panelists to turn on their video feeds so we can introduce them one by one. And pause for a selfie, obviously. There's no Zoom meeting without a selfie.
Yeah.
There's Oyin Khan. Missing Edwin.
Okay. So we are waiting for one of our panelists, Edwin. Okay, Edwin is on the call. We're just waiting for Edwin to turn on his video, so that the gender balance can improve here. It's 25-75 now. Let's make it 50-60. I know, right? Yeah. Okay. We'll wait for Edwin, but I'll just go ahead, right away and introduce our panelist, who is also, oh, great, Edwin is here. Yes, okay. All right.
Yeah.
Let me introduce our first panelist, who is also a member of the oversight group of AIRA. Members of the oversight group love to call themselves OGs, and I say themselves today so that I can deny my membership of the group. Edwin Makwati. Edwin is the openness and accountability researcher at Legal Resources Center in South Africa. He is a former Botswana Defense Front Force officer who resigned from active service in December 2012 to pursue a Bachelor of Laws degree with the University of Johannesburg. He's also an alumnus of the Columbia Summer Program in American Law and a graduate of the prestigious Royal Military Academy, SANOS, in the UK. Above all, he is an activist passionate about human rights and international law. And I'll just go straight away and also introduce Onyekon, who is also a member of AIRA. Onyekon Sola Akintola Bello. Onyekon is Governance and Digital Security Practice Lead at Co-Creation Hub, that we fondly call CC Hub, Nigeria, which focuses on bridging the gap between government and the citizens using technology. One of our mandates under the practice is to create and promote safe spaces. This is where she does all our digital rights and digital security work. In that role, she has trained journalists on government surveillance, conducted vulnerability assessment for civil society organizations, worked on digital inclusion for disadvantaged groups, focused on bringing online safety to the average African, and more and more and more. Welcome, Onyekon.
We are also joined by Koliwe Majama. Koliwe is a Zimbabwean media, information, and technology consultant with over 15 years experience in civil society lobbying and advocacy, involved in internet governance processes in our country through research, programming, and multi-stakeholder engagement. She is currently the Association for Progressive Communications Coordinator of the Africa Declaration on Internet Rights and Freedoms, also known as AFDEC, and she is the organizer of the Africa School of Internet Governance, otherwise known as AfriSIG. As a trained journalist with a diploma in media and communications, Koliwe is both a print and broadcast journalist in Zimbabwe. She holds a bachelor's in media a bachelor in media and society studies from Zimbabwe's Midland State University, and is an African School of Internet Governance alumni. She has invested in networking and thought leadership in the region and globally on varying internet governance trends, including gender and the internet, which she's very passionate of. 4, welcome Koliwe, welcome Edwin, and welcome Onyekon.
Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you, everyone. Ashley and I have a series of questions for our panelists, and our conversation will run to a Twitter chat. So if you can multitask, you can keep your, one side of you here and the other side on Twitter. But as we have since learned during this pandemic, the ability to multitask is almost overrated. We would like, if you'd like to participate in the chat, please ask questions and offer reactions, either through our Twitter page, AIRA_Africa, AIRA_Africa, or contribute to the conversation here, or you can simply tweet with #AIRA hashtag. And at the end of the session, we'll open the floor for any other questions from the audience through Zoom. So just, okay, quick check, everyone is ready. And we will start with, would like to even start with all of our panelists, each one of you to answer this introductory question. Just a few questions, no pressure, the simplest ones of them. Questions are, number one, why digital rights? Why should we be talking about digital rights? In some locations, it's a cold afternoon and it's been a busy week for many, so it could be a good time to take a quick break, a meal or a snack or a nap, but we're talking digital rights. Why should we be talking about digital rights? And also, what attracts you to this, issue over others? Why not other topics? And of course, what we'd also like to know is, why have you chosen to focus all, or at least some of your attention, on the digital aspect of human rights? Well, we can maybe start with, in the order of introduction, we can maybe start with you, Edwin, if you don't mind.
Hello, Benga. Why digital rights? That's a very important question. And why would we put so much effort into trying to ensure that digital rights are protected in all spheres of our daily life? I think through the past few decades, things have changed so much that the world is basically interconnected, and people are able only to interact, form business ideas, advocate for human rights, and do a lot of other things, even meet online and advocate for development within the different countries. And if digital rights are not protected, we know what happens in terms of many governments, especially within African context, whereby governments engage in mass surveillance and they crush dissent, and all those that are seen to be anti-government are bullied or even victimized online, to the extent that people are not able to partake meaningfully in the development of their countries and in the political discourse and in the economic discourse as well. Secondly, in a country like ours, South Africa, we do a lot of things online, especially in terms of organizing protests, in terms of sharing ideas. And if those rights are not protected, we're going to see a lot of discontent where people are abused, and even those that are perceived to be leaders of protests online are targeted and eventually sometimes arrested. Then it also brings in other things of brutality and state violence online as well. And secondly, privacy is a very important part of the freedom of expression, because they all go together. If you invade my privacy, I'm not able to freely express myself and be a citizen that can contribute meaningfully into the general discourse of where the country I love, which direction it must take. And that is one of the reasons why the LRC and its partners are always so vocal about digital rights. There's a lot I can say about this, but let me just give us a chance.
Obviously. Thank you so much, Edwin. Let's come to you, Onyekon. So why digital rights? And same question, what attracts you to this issue over others?
So I think that for me, there's this push for more and more Africans to go online. So governments are pushing this narrative, the private sector is pushing this narrative, this idea that technology is going to be the panacea that solves all Africa's problems. And I know, like, while technology has the power for great good, there's also the misuse aspect. It's really important that we kind of get ahead of that and prevent that misuse. And it's also just a once in a lifetime chance to get it right. With other issues, we kind of are born and then we kind of meet the issues on as they are already. The legislation is already kind of developed. But with digital rights, we kind of get in front of it and do it right the first time around. And just that chance to shape things in the right way. I think that's what interests me to this area.
Thank you. Comrade.
Thanks, Benga. So for me, really is, so what I'm finding interesting about this conversation is also being able to frame digital rights as human rights. So you'll remember our famous statement in our community now, which says that the rights that we enjoy offline should be enjoyed online. So if you look at the coalition that I'm coordinating now, the AFDE coalition, our current push for the principles in the declaration is actually hinged on continental instruments that are existing and pushing for or upholding a human rights agenda. So you'll find even in the formulation, which I know you, Benga, were part of, and also a representative of CIPESA, is that one of the key instruments that we're looking at when we're looking at coming up with principles to guide, digital rights is the African Charter on Human Rights and on Human and People's Rights. So the reason why we want to start speaking or putting digital rights on the agenda now is because of the way we as citizens have become reliant on the internet and technologies for our everyday activities. So now there's this sense that everything is more efficient, everything is more convenient. We are spoiled for choice in terms of, what we can connect to or how we can connect to as end users. But then there's also a need for us to then say, as much as we have all this convenience and choice, what are the standards that will ensure that we are still experiencing, the joys of being on the internet in a manner that observes the rights of maybe another user, or where governments themselves and the private sector too acknowledge that beyond them making money and their specific interests, users of the internet are human beings and therefore should be treated as human beings online. And this is what the push is. And this is why it's very important, because like Oyinkan says, just the parallels being run around the economy. Edwin's talking about politics, but we're saying we need a standard, and we need to make sure that that standard is actually bound by the existing continental human rights framework.
Thank you, panelists, for the first round of responses. Koliwe, I'm going to put you on the spot again. Your bio mentioned two keywords, coordinator and organizer. So my question to you is, why collaborate? Given the context of digital rights in the continent, what is the potential impact of partnerships and coalitions in advancing digital rights on the continent, bearing in mind the challenges that we face for multiple actors, state and non-state?
Right. So thanks for that. I'm really in the spotlight because my lips are getting dry. But anyway, so collaboration actually the movement. So I'm an activist. People can come together for a common cause. So we may not actually be in agreement on the strategy that we are going to take in terms of achieving a certain goal or getting to a certain cause, but we are agreed on where we are headed. So if you look at the AFDEC coalition, one of our key strategies is actually around network building and partnership. And this is because we recognize that a strong coalition is well networked in terms of civil society organizations you interact with, especially those that are defending human rights. And also government. I know this is like very contentious, but I like what happened in Nigeria with civil society. Actually, you could actually see the collaboration that was between Paradigm Initiative, Media Rights Agenda, when they were working on the digital rights bill, the partnership or collaboration with Parliament in ensuring that there's actually an understanding of what the critical issues are. For business, it's also important to collaborate with them because there seems to be a sense, and I think there's consensus around the fact that business or the private sector and the private sector in particular doesn't actually understand what it means to enhance or to push a rights agenda while making profits and while being a service provider. But I think what's also important is that when a movement or people collaborate as organizations in their different stakeholder groups, this creates like very good preconditions of, responding to threats and violations, because each and everybody comes in with their own skills, with their own contacts within government, for instance. They know better how to, maneuver certain sectors that you will deal with. So what you find is that your demands, especially at national level, are more legitimate when you work as a coalition. And then I think just to cut it quickly is to also say that I've seen quite a lot of this collaboration coming in. So within our network, we have over 52 organizations, but we've seen a lot of collaborations within the national context, but we've also seen a lot of endorsements and collaborations around this COVID-19 period, where you'll find Paradigm Initiative comes up with an appeal or a letter to the Ugandan Commission, everybody signs onto it because it's in line with the work that we're doing. Access Now comes up with a statement to address MTN. You're looking at the number of African countries that have MTN as a mobile network operator. So the demands get more legitimate. The push is stronger because you have people with different skills, different experiences coming together for a common cause.
Thank you very much, Koliwe. Oyinkan and Edwin, building on from Koliwe's response, Oyinkan CC Hub is a technology hub. What opportunities or potential is there for technologists to collaborate in advancing digital rights on the continent?
I think that there's a massive opportunity here because I think that with technology tools that we can reach a wider range of people, but the truth is that one or two organizations can't build all the tools. So for me, I think that there should be a sort of a move towards open source sharing, building a lot of open source platforms that anyone on the African continent can access. And I think that that's really where technologists or innovation hubs or anyone or, that wants to do that can plug in when it comes to collaboration and just helping us highlight these issues and how we can, for example, a help desk, an online help desk, an incident response help desk, just so many things that technology can do in this space.
Thank you, Oyinkan. Edwin, where do we see the legal fraternity in the collaboration around digital rights on the continent?
When it comes to the legal fraternity, you understand that digital rights are protected, even before the internet became a thing. We were already aware of many rights that have always been there, the fundamental human rights that are protected by the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, for example. And those include the right to privacy, the right to freedom of expression, for example. Maybe when these particular instruments were promulgated, they were not thinking of the era of digital rights, for example, now. But now, we're in the digital era. The same rights that we talk about in those instruments are very much relevant in the digital space. The right to dignity can be infringed in the digital space. Violence can be perpetuated against people in the digital space. Any form of violence or violation of human rights that are protected in international law and domestic law, it can still be violated in the digital space. If governments think of interest, for example, as a political person or a threat in the economic space, they can victimize you in the digital space. That's where the legal fraternity comes in to protect those rights. And how do we work? The Legal Resources Center, for example, is a public interest litigation organization. And we have a lot of friends all over Africa and abroad, in overseas as well. And we collaborate in terms of approaching also international bodies like the African Commission when violation of rights, both in physical form and in the digital space has occurred. If you may check, there's one case called 10 Human Rights Organization versus UK, where the Legal Resources Center is one of the parties, which was surveilled online by the UK government. And we took that matter to court, the European Court. So it's all about the legal fraternity is all about litigation, and it's about advocacy and using the law as a tool for the protection of human rights in everyday life and also in the digital space, as we have all moved towards that. And right now, you see, we are meeting here in this space to protect this space as well. And that's very interesting. And I think, yeah, the legal fraternity has got quite a big role to play.
Thank you, Edwin. And I'm going to stay with you for a second because you've actually talked about the legal fraternity. But I wanted you to, just for about a minute, speak to any major barriers to developing digital rights partnerships and coalitions and how to overcome them, building on the experience you've had with the legal fraternity.
The issues that we get to have as challenges are quite enormous, and this is one problem that we have. The issue of digital rights is politicized because the government also used the digital space as a way of suppressing dissent or to surveil those people that they deem a threat. So if you come towards the government, or if you combat a digital violation of rights by the government, you also become an enemy of the government in a way, because you are threatening their space. So it becomes really problematic, because now you're fighting against this giant that is the government. Politicians will tell you one thing, say, and do something else. We go to courts, for example, and we get orders that this particular internet service provider or this mobile service provider should stop doing 1, 2, 3. But they keep doing it because they have got the backing of the government, and the government likes to collect data on people and make sure that those that are deemed threats are dealt with accordingly. I don't know how they deal with them, maybe through victimizing their businesses or through elimination in some instances. But those are the barriers that we get. It's collaboration between the government and these big multinational companies to thwart the efforts of the legal fraternity in fighting for human rights. It's power struggles. Yeah.
Interesting, and I'm glad you talked about power struggles and all. Let me come to you, Koliwe. So you not only train future leaders in the sector through AfriSig. Many people that I know, including myself, including yourself, actually, alumni of this institution that you now help facilitate the training in, and you also lead the African Declaration, coalition. So let's get real. What are the things that will not make this collaboration happen? We know for a fact we can't all just hold hands and sing kumbaya. It doesn't happen. There are many waters under the bridge. What are those waters under the bridge? Let's put them out there. And how do we overcome them?
Thanks, Benga. So yeah, I'm so happy that we're actually having this conversation, because I think that the digital rights movement on the continent has grown. I mean, from the time I started working around internet governance issues in 2015, up till now, when I look at the number of civil society organizations that are working in different jurisdictions and in different communities, it's amazing the impact that we have had in, just growing the awareness among civil society. However, the challenge is around funding streams. So we have very limited funding. So definitely that if you do not make a pool of funding that's going to pull you through the next 3 years, your survival is primarily on sub-grants that's going to come from the bigger network or coalitions like AIRA or FDEC or whoever else has a particular sub-grant. But the disadvantage is most of the stronger coalitions and networks already have their own strategic plan. So the challenge is, how do we, as stronger, bigger networks on the continent currently, identify smaller initiatives in the countries? So how do we do this is looking at which stakeholder groups civil society organizations are working with, so that we don't have overkill on those who are working with parliament and those who are working with the private sector, and not having anybody dealing with the consumer councils, with the judiciary, especially at a time like this when we're looking at privacy and data protection issues. Secondly is the reality of the functionality of cross partnerships across the coalitions or the networks themselves. So as FDEC, we are a member of the Net Rights Coalition, and we have similar agenda. But how do we then agree on what it is that our long-term, because remember when I introduced myself, I said that we may not agree in terms of strategy, but we do have a specific goal. So I liked what happened last year in terms of putting or setting the agenda on data protection. There was sort of consensus, because I think of the time that we're in, when governments are looking at coming up with the continental trade agreement for the economy, where there's like push for, clarity on data protection issues. So that one was clear. But who sets the agenda for all these collaborations? It's important so that we are not replicating, so that we are diversifying our network and membership. And we are also ensuring that we are catering for sections within our campaigns and our pushes that are not currently catered for. So everyone is doing research, but what are we doing research about? And after that research is done, how are we consolidating as the different, networks to see that this becomes a sort of uniform push or call across all the respective coalitions or partnerships across the continent? I hope that answers the question a bit.
Of course, it does, and it also raises more questions, which is great, which is the whole essence of talking about collaborations and partnerships. It's not going to happen today completely, it's not going to happen tomorrow, but we've started a journey. And that takes me to Onyekon, because Onyekon, I know you're pulled on many sides, right? Not just in digital rights advocacy, but also in digital security. And because you're part of CCOP, you're also pulled into, the other aspects of the economy in terms of startups and all that. But yet you're extremely committed to an AIRA partnership. What are some of the challenges that you see in maybe institutions like yours that are not 100% digital rights groups, but you have to contribute, and you're contributing to this process, and how have you been able to navigate those complexities?
So I think that for us, it's just finding the right way to collaborate and finding the right partnerships. I think that because we're not a typical NGO, there are issues around how we function. And so, which is why I think for us, it was important for us to think around, okay, what skills do we have and how can we lend these skills to the cause? And this is where we came up with our digital security unit, where we do vulnerability assessments. Because we were like, okay, there are a lot of civil society organizations that can't protect themselves online, and how do we support them to do this? And so for us, is how do we go in there, conduct these assessments, give them a report, and even just check back with them as well. Another thing that we found was quite interesting was that a lot of civil society organizations they've fallen prey to attacks, but they just never say anything, or they don't know who to approach. So for us, it was also really important to add that incident response aspect to it as well. But it's something that we already do internally, right? We do it for our startups. We do a lot of data, because I do a lot of data privacy work as well for the startups in our portfolio. So it's just how do we extend those services to the civil society space? And I think that's the way to think about it. What do you already do that you can then use to support digital rights? So so at the moment, I'm really interested in surveillance capitalism, right? And for me, it's how do we get civil society to take up that mantle as a social enterprise? I'm not sure if Co-Creation Hub is going to be able to take up the mantle, but I think civil society can start talking about surveillance capitalism. And so it's like hosting sessions of surveillance capitalism, breaking down these very technical terms that people might not understand, but breaking them down in ways that people can understand so that they can then take up the mantle. So I think that's the way, if you're in technology, what do you already have in your arsenal that you can use to add to this fight and help amplify their voices, which is why it's about creating and promoting safe spaces, pushing the people that are already doing the work. There's no point starting work that you don't really have experience in, but how do you support the people that are already doing the work better? And that, I think that's for us, that's what it's about.
It's very clear the importance of digital rights work and collaborating in digital rights work. There's opportunities with technologies through innovation, like Onyekon mentioned, through strategic litigation, as Edwin has pointed out, and the multifaceted advocacy that Koliwe has mentioned. Of course, there's value in diversity around the partnerships or collaborations that pursue digital rights work, such as AIRA and others, and complementarity in expertise and resources. Koliwe, of course, pointed out, as well as the other panelists, in some of the complexities around partnerships and collaboration, including funding. That stuck out for me, as mentioned by Koliwe. Yesterday, there was a panel that explored re-establishing relationships between activists and actors in the digital rights space with foundations and funding organizations focused on digital rights. Bearing all that in mind, I am going to ask each of the panelists what trends they see around digital rights in their respective regions that they're working, but also free to point to other parts of the continent and beyond. So Oyinkan, if you don't mind, what current trends do you see in Nigeria or West Africa and beyond?
Thanks, Ashna. In fact, this is a really interesting one because from the beginning of the pandemic to sort of when countries start easing up, we kind of did a sort of a survey of the African continent and kind of to map what some of the issues were when it comes to digital rights. And so I'll just kind of touch on the three that I think that for me are most personal. So what I'm saying is that there's an increase in online violence, but mostly, well, not mostly, but there's a trend of increase in online violence against women. So for example, if you look at Kenya, Ghana, Nigeria, there's so many issues of people sharing intimate images online that have been shared with them in confidence. During COVID-19, there was an issue around, people don't trust governments in Africa. And so when 2 people were reported to have successfully recovered from COVID, in Kenya, people didn't believe it, and then there was some form of investigation that went on, and people then released the identity of one of the people that had been that had COVID, and it was a woman, and then she was subject to like online bullying and harassment, and there was a man and a woman, and there was a woman that was particularly picked on. So I think for me, there's just an increase in online violence against women. But that just also ties into this increased call for people to share personal information online as a form of social justice. So these breaches of privacy, people are not taking them seriously. People are kind of putting their idea of self-justice ahead of what is proper and what is right when it comes to privacy. And that kind of also just ties into this reduced tolerance for opposing views on social media, and still ties into cyberbullying. So for me, it's sort of like, a vicious cycle that keeps repeating itself. And then we have on the government side, there's a lot of targeted misinformation. And we've seen this when it comes to elections or any political issue or anything that has to do with like a government versus citizen or party versus party standoff. And so for me, that's a sort of worrying trend because it's targeted and, is being manufactured in these like click farms that we thought that, only existed in Europe or in America, but apparently we also have them on the African continent. So those are some of the trends that I'm seeing. And these are the issues that I think that digital rights activists should sort of be focusing on at the moment.
Kaliwe, does your experience echo what Oyinkan has mentioned in terms of trends around digital rights?
Yeah. So I think one of the trends that seems to be common, so there's like 5 of them, but I think I'll speak to the top 3, which is, so the first one is access and affordability. And I think the conversation around access now has actually grown to, or there's been a shift from, the responsibility of the telecoms authorities or governments to provide, alternative connectivity through development of community information centers to calls for, ownership of networks by the communities, which is the community networks movement. And I think that this is a common, so the fact that Africans are disconnected is common, whether you're whichever of the 5 regions you are, of the 5 sub-regions you are. But there's also the realization that the same calls that we made for community radio at some point are the same calls that we should be making for community networks. And I think when, just like doing a survey of it, you find that there will still be challenges around government opening up around spectrum that can be used by underserved communities or areas where the private sector is not going, to issues around just the cost. What would be the cost of running those networks and actually getting a bit of meaningful access within a community? And that completely goes back to issues around bureaucratic processes of obtaining licenses for communities such as those. So I think that this is a common feature in terms of just like people being disconnected, and also the need for us to actually advance and pull together in terms of just like calling for community networks to actually expand internet access. The issue of affordability also remains critical. And I think that what is important within that, in terms of just looking even at the monitoring that was done by members of the AFDEC coalition around costs, is that there needs to be a stronger campaign for, just against these consumer taxes on data and internet services, because this is something that is common across the region. So you'll find that in the licensing regimes, such as the one that you have in Uganda for social media, I think if you look at the bloggers' taxes in Tanzania and also in Kenya, and I think the more recent development, I think it was the finance bill in Kenya that was looking at the possibility of introducing what they called a digital marketplace tax. So it's looking critically at what is it exactly within our context that affects issues to do with tax, as it were. Then the last thing that I'm going to mention, obviously, because I think we've spoken to privacy and everything, is also just the demands that we're making on service providers on availability and quality of access and services. So if you look at the letter that was just published recently by Access Now, that was addressing the MTN, I think there are really serious issues around transparency of how much, so the quality, and I think the quality of the internet that we're accessing, but it's also got to do with how literate people are. So if you come to Zimbabwe, you will be very confused about how much data you use, because we have a data package for WhatsApp, we have a data package for Instagram, then we have a private Wi-Fi bundle. But at the same time, you're looking at the fact that sometimes I'm online, so I had to join this call earlier because I was not sure whether it would be my Wi-Fi, my ADSL connection that would be better, or my data, my mobile data that would be better. So just that compromise and demand on our service providers to say, listen, we need more transparency and openness around our connectivity. We also need to be clear when exactly you subsidize the pricing for us. So with some service providers, what we found is that they have a midnight bundle. So I have to be awake at midnight to experience the value of the internet connectivity or the package that I'm on. So there's a lot of manipulation by the private sector that we should also be speaking about beyond just affordability and the actual infrastructure is, okay, I am online. I want to know how much of the internet I can be exposed to. I want clarity and transparency from you as my service provider on the service that you're giving to me. Yeah.
Thank you, Koliwe. And I was actually just telling someone today, and I'm sure many of us agree, that the phrase of the year is "Can you hear me?" It's become very, very common, as a phrase. Let me come to you, Edwin. Thanks to Onyekon and Koliwe, we now have seen some trends, that they've seen in the past. I'm going to ask you, Edwin, can you look into the crystal ball and see the challenges in advance? One of the advantages of your answer will be that we will now find out what the problems or the challenges of the future of 2021 and beyond are going to be, and we can solve those problems in advance. So over to you, Prophet Edwin Makwati. Your mic is muted, I think. Your words are so powerful, your mic is muted, Edwin.
Oh, hi. Yes, I was saying as a prophet, I should say receive. And anyway, look, this is what I foresee here. In South Africa, for example, we had a lot of changes that have taken place, a lot of trends that have taken place in the past few months. As at January, for example, in 2019, there was about 3.1 million cell phone connections compared to 103.5 million now, right? And internet connectivity has increased to 62% by 3.1% in 1 year. And then social media penetration is at 37%, which is an increase of 19% in a period of a year. Now that is that is remarkable if you look at the space and the amount of changes that have taken place. And now that also speaks to the fact that, you know, we are having more connection, but of course, every good thing comes with its own challenges. As more people get connected to the internet, we are now going to be talking of things like fake news versus fact, and also the government now trying to clamp down on free speech by saying this is fake news, this is not right to say on social media and stuff like that, because social media spreads like wildfire. If you're using your cell phone to talk to me now alone, for example, it will take a bit of time. But if I post something on Facebook, it goes press within a few seconds, it's in the US and all over the world. So now many will become paranoid with that if everybody becomes connected, we're going to have challenges of like what Corey was saying earlier about this GBV as well being perpetuated online, and people doing all these crimes online that we have never heard of before, that new crimes are going to develop. I foresee new crimes coming online. Human trafficking also becoming a thing, because now human traffickers have got quick connectivity to move person A from point A to B and stuff like that. Now, then this is to the government also come with very repressive laws now that become a blanket to even victimize those who are law-abiding citizens online. In South Africa, they started there's this law that was promulgated called the Cyber Crimes Bill, which is one piece of law that I'm not happy about, because it kind of stops a lot of communications that we've been used to say, no, this is fake news, this is not right to say on social media. And it really puts quite a broad definition to the concept of what fake news is. And you can be arrested and prosecuted for that. Now, this is where the problem is. There is no standard of what is fake news and what is not. There is no particular gauge to say what is right to say, what is wrong to say. And everybody can wake up, even drink something bitter and say, this person has done something that is criminal online. That is a challenge. I see the fact that there's now more internet connectivity, people are going to be going more online. We're going to be having these meetings online than ever before. I've had more meetings online this year than I've ever had all the meetings in my life. You know, like the meetings I've had this year online are more than all the meetings I've ever had. There are so many. Now then, that's where then with spies coming, government spies are always online checking what we're talking about, which they couldn't do when we met in our small room somewhere in Auckland Park. They couldn't reach us there. Now online, probably they are here. So those are some of the challenges that we're going to get. And then we're going to have more people's rights being violated in that stance. But then also we must understand as people who are online that there's rights and there's responsibilities as well. We can't just be talking of rights alone. And it is now the challenge of all organizations, human rights organizations, to make sure that they also teach people that as much as you have rights online, you also have responsibility. You cannot behave anyhow just because it's now online. It's a laissez-faire and everybody does whatever they want. And that's what I think needs to be done.
Thank you so much, Edwin. Throughout the conversation, each of the panelists has pointed to the various trends: gender-based violence online, data protection and privacy, freedom of expression, misinformation, access and affordability. And mention has been made around the opportunities for collaboration, be it with technologists, with the legal fraternity, the private sector, including telecommunications and internet service providers. My next question to Koliwe and Oyinkan is, are there opportunities for collaboration with entities or activists outside of the digital rights space, such as traditional human rights organizations or organizations and entities working on other causes?
I can go first. I think that there definitely is, because they are users. So one of the things that happens at AfriSig, at the School on Internet Governance, is that you do a basket and then you identify the different groups of users of the internet and start to reflect on the work that you are doing. So one of the very important questions also is, do digital rights actually matter to somebody who doesn't actually have a device? Or do digital rights really matter to somebody who doesn't understand how to use a browser? So I think that there's actually an opportunity for different players, different stakeholder groups to be able to identify why it makes sense to be part of a digital rights campaign. And it reminds me of the time I was working with the women's rights movement here in Zimbabwe, and trying to get them to understand why we needed to push to have revenge porn in the cybersecurity bill. And this was very difficult because I remember sitting in a meeting that was convened with the Portfolio Committee on ICTs. And then because I have a nose ring and I had sex workers with me in that room, we were being questioned around our morality. So what that means is that when you identify a group, maybe a sexual or a gender minority group, maybe a woman in the rural areas, it's important for you to be able to do a mapping of what the linkages in the main or key thematic issues around digital rights you would be dealing with. So for a woman who doesn't own her device, quickly comes to my mind that the fact is she would probably be sharing a device with her husband. So what does that do in terms of who she interacts with and what she says to them? So we all don't like our mothers-in-law, and you are probably using your husband's phone, and you want to tell your sisters that this woman's been on your back like 24/7, you don't even know what the hell to do, but you're using the same device as your husband. What are the limitations? What are the rights that married couples have? So you go back to the church now and you say in the church, there's the women's group, then there's the men's group. So they have separate meetings, and there's issues around conformity and your conjugal rights and the rights you have as an individual in a marriage. How do you break down digital rights to a married couple, a conventional Pentecostal going church couple, to say to the man or to the woman, you should not be touching your husband's phone, no matter how sexy the woman that is his secretary looks and your suspicions, there are rights issues to deal with. So it's identifying within the groups and being able to say, how do I make this conversation relevant beyond the bread and butter issues? And I think that as digital rights activists, we are guilty of not thinking deeper about what privacy actually means for a young woman in an African context who looks up abortion and starts having adverts in her, in her inbox or on her social media platforms on a shared laptop at home. So if my daughter looks at issues to do with abortion and I look at the device that they use together, I'm going to see what it is exactly that they've been browsing. So it's breaking it down, identifying your group, getting really intimate to understand how you can make them understand that by circulating or resending a nude picture, you are actually perpetuating and, lessening the chances of somebody to actually reintegrate into society, even if they are nameless within your context. They're going to walk in the city center and someone is going to remember who they are from what it is that you forwarded. So yeah, thanks.
Thanks, Kaliwe. Ainkan, your thoughts?
I think Kaliwe said it all. I think the only thing that I would add to that is even looking at it from a business standpoint or a startup standpoint, people are looking for services that give them more privacy, not less privacy. And so if you have digital rights legislation that says that, the government can just ask the service providers to give up your information, no one's going to want to use your service. So I think it's even in the interest of businesses to make sure that the right type of legislation is being passed. Even if you're looking at it from a purely profits, capitalist point of view, that's another way to look at it. And so in that way, that all actors are important, and all actors can be brought into this space because it affects every single person that's on the planet at the moment.
Thank you, Onyekon. Let me ask this question, and I would like to start with you, Edwin. This year, clearly, as we've seen, from Supesa's report that was launched yesterday, focused on, what's happened during COVID-19 and all that, Paradigm Initiative's report is going to focus heavily also on that. And I can imagine many reports this year are going to focus on that. And I'd like to know from you and also from the other panelists, how has COVID-19 impacted this, we're talking about collaboration, but how has COVID-19 affected this transnational approach to digital rights advocacy and all of the work that we're talking about, that we should do as partners?
No, I've muted it.
Okay, I think what is actually happening here is that we have COVID-19 and then the lockdown. I think just before this COVID-19 band, I sent you a text saying, I think there's going to be a lockdown, and my ticket was already bought to come to Abuja, and I didn't come because of, and at the time you're like, no, there's only 1 case or 2 cases in Nigeria. I remember that, no, we're going to be traveling, and we didn't, right? Because this was bigger than us. So in essence now, the COVID-19 has confined us to this space, to meeting online only. And we are even more prone to being spied on and all kinds of stuff because I think the biggest enemies of the state at the moment, though we don't see them as enemies, is the governments. Governments don't see human rights advocates as friends, but as people who are stopping them from doing whatever they could get away with, which they're not getting away with because we are watching them. So I think the collaboration between the different NGOs and human rights defenders and those that work in the digital space has been affected to some extent because we cannot meet physically. But at the same time, I am very happy that we're able to meet online as and when we want without any barriers of distance and travel costs and convenience and leaving your wives and kids behind to travel all over the world. Maybe many marriages have been saved and relationships because people have not been traveling the whole year, leaving their families behind. I think that's a good thing. So I think we should take advantage of this space and meet as much online as we can, while at the same time advocating for government to stay off NGOs' business and of people's business online. It is a good thing that we're not going online, and I think even after COVID-19, this is going to be the trend. So our collaborations cannot be that much affected. Maybe what is affected now is that I cannot maybe go to the communities in Uganda and share with them my experiences in South Africa because they don't have access to the internet. I cannot go to Botswana and share with the people there about my experiences physically because they cannot meet me on Zoom. But everyone else, if we can fight for everyone to have connectivity, every 100% connectivity around the world, we will be able to reach everyone, and nothing is going to be a barrier to us, whether COVID-19 or the second wave or the third wave or any other pandemic that may ever come. We will still be able to meet and minimize costs and economize our fight for human rights. It should not be a burden.
Thank you, Edwin. And your point about saved marriages because of travel restriction is very well noted. So I saw Coliwe's reaction and I was like, comrade, let me come to you. So what is the impact of, of COVID-19, not just on the work that you do with, within your coalition, but all of the plans you had in December 2019 or January 2020, all of the meetings that were supposed to happen, the usual suspects working hard during the day and hanging out in the evenings. What has been happening?
Mm. Yeah, save for the fact that my marriage has actually survived. I was worried that with this COVID-19, I'm stuck with this man. Anyway, I think that the collaboration has been good in terms of amplifying our work, just as digital rights activists. We have had to remain visible. So I can't afford not to be at FIFAfrica this year. And I can't afford not to say something about my country because then I'm drowned, like the work we're doing is drowned. But what it has, I think one of the observations I've made is that, you know, never have digital rights seemed so relevant now, like before than now. And I think we're actually beginning to feel on our fingertips the disparities that exist in terms of the connections or working or collaborations that we do even at a national level. So we find ourselves in this echo chamber. There are certain people who are connected all the time and connected for, who can connect for about an hour, but we've had to start repackaging the way we are doing or conducting our capacity building. We've seen communities or people now doing pre-recorded audios so that they can be distributed to a certain sector of the communities they work with because they have no connectivity. And still, there's still that barrier of not all of them have data on the day. So there's been a lot of movement of our budgets in terms of facilitating and ensuring that people will still be connected or people can still interact at a level where it is meaningful. But I think also the reality of, you know, just the reality of how we don't have the information that we require. It was very difficult. So I watched Paradigm Initiative moving their annual conference this year. It took a while for us. We were all excited. We all had our sessions ready and the like, but it took a while. You've noticed also that as AfriSig, we were still waiting to see how bad things will be like in October before we can actually make a decision on whether or not we're actually going ahead. But I must say that for the organization or the funding partners that we've been working with, we've also seen that there's been a lot of understanding and commonality around delivery of work. So we've had the opportunity to change our, you know, our grant proposals, to realign our budgets with our reality. And it's been hard. I think the most difficult thing has been racing against time, where you're spreading yourself too thin because you have 100,000 that needs to be spent by October. And you've lost 3 months, and part of that included people having to travel to attend the, you know, UN Human Rights Council, to attend WSIS, and that was not happening. So I think that has been our experience. Very difficult, but we are still afloat. And I think one of the greatest achievements for us as the coalition was being able to come together and then actually demonstrate the impact of COVID-19 on our work and the rights that we are, you know, advocating for every day in a position paper.
Onyekon, thank you, Koliwe. Thank you, Edwin. Onyekon, what is it like for you? And I know particularly you work across Nigeria and Kenya. How has this been for you in terms of COVID? The impact on digital rights?
So I think that for us, it made us think a lot about inclusive technology because in the past, like we have these programs where we train people and then we do that face to face, but then with the pandemic, we couldn't go to Kenya. And we had a lot of sessions working with people with disabilities, and we had to move those online. But then in moving that online, you have to make that accessible. So I think for us, that was the biggest thing that it taught us, and we had to work with another group who had that expertise. So I think that for us, it was collaborating with groups that we might not have thought about, but we needed to because we didn't have that expertise. So it was just that, and for us, it's just opened up this whole space around, there's a lot of things that people are doing, a lot of technology, but who can access it? What's the usability of this technology? How can old people access? So there's a lot of stuff around e-government services, go online to do XYZ, but how do old people interact with this technology? And that's something that, you know, really struck out to us. And that's something that we are looking into partnering with other organizations around. So I think that's for us, that was the biggest thing in bringing out things that we hadn't really thought about around accessibility and rights, because everyone deserves to be connected and everyone has the right to be able to use these services, especially if it's government services. And I think for us, that was the biggest eye-opener, and having to do that across both locations as well. That was it for us.
Clearly, the COVID-19 outbreak has had both positive and negative impacts on digital rights on the continent, and by her own admission, Koliwe's marriage. Before we open the floor to the Q&A from the audience, I am going to ask each of the panelists for one milestone for 2020 and one prediction for 2021. It can be positive or negative. Obviously, outside of the pandemic, we've seen a number of these. For instance, Senegal remaining a pioneer in data governance on the continent, and Tanzania becoming quite worrying, as well as my own home country, Uganda. So from each of you, one milestone for 2020 outside of the pandemic, and one prediction for 2021, positive or negative. Edwin, would you like to go first?
One milestone that I can think of is the fact that in South Africa we managed, CSOs managed to challenge certain parts of the regulations that to do with COVID-19. And they said outside of COVID-19, they managed to challenge some regulations that had to do with certain laws that allowed the Director of Health to surveil people limitlessly and without safeguards. And those laws were reversed and they were able to go back to normalcy and sanity. And then my prediction is that post COVID-19, we're going to have serious problems with the governments having tasted the fruits of being able to control people without much opposition. Because many people, due to fear of the pandemic, have given the government so much leeway to do anything they want. Without balancing that need to control people with the repercussions that will come after. And then we're going to have problems now reining the governments back in, regardless of the milestones that we made in the past.
Thank you, Edwin. Oyinkan?
So one of the milestones for me as regards Nigeria is that this year we saw a lot of pushback on social media on bills and acts. And for me, that was really interesting, especially when it came to privacy. There was a lot of things that legislators tried to sneak in and people were just like, we're not having it. And for me, that was really interesting to see, because I feel like this year was kind of like a movement, and like, you know, people were really interested about rights and freedom of expression. And for me, that was the milestone of 2020 as regards digital rights. I think predictions for next year, I think that there's going to be a lot of issues around the ethical use of artificial intelligence. I think that we are kind of ignoring it, but it's come to the fore. And in Africa, so for example, in the UK, we saw what happened with the A-level results and the algorithms that gave predicted grades. And like, you don't know what the possibilities are in Africa. And so many tech companies are pushing towards using artificial intelligence to save costs. So I think that there's going to be a lot around ethics in artificial intelligence, how we develop either joint frameworks as regions or individual frameworks as a country. So that will be interesting to see next year.
Thank you, Oyinkan. There was a session yesterday on decolonizing AI, and echoing your prediction for 2021. Koliwe, besides your marriage.
So for me, the highlight for 2020, which actually didn't get as much publicity as it should have, is the submission. For the first time, we had a complaint that was submitted to the African Commission by the Media Rights Agenda to challenge the recurrent practice of internet shutdowns in Africa across 28 countries. And while the milestone or the highlight of it is that while it was the Media Rights Agenda in the forefront, they managed to bring in a lot of other organizations to sign it. So for me, it came as a very valid, relevant and legitimate action around internet shutdowns. In terms of just my predictions, I think that we're still going to have governments responding harshly to civil protests and civil action with internet shutdowns. And I think this is primarily because we actually haven't seen any action at continental level or any governments being held to account for internet shutdowns. I think that this trend is going to continue, and I think that it is an opportunity for us to also reflect, going beyond research, going beyond having the conversations on internet shutdowns within our own convenings, to coming up with a more, a more critically and more well-thought strategy around how we begin to hold governments accountable at regional level.
Thank you, Koliwe. Thank you, Onyekon. Thank you, Edwin. And of course, thank you, Ashna, for an interesting conversation so far. We now have 11.5 minutes left. I always wanted to say that, by the way, not exactly 12. And we have 3 questions already. And we've been monitoring the questions. Monitoring? Okay, that sounds interesting. We've been checking the questions that are coming in on Zoom here, and we may have a few more, but we already have 3 questions. And this is the time that would encourage you, if anyone has any questions, either on Twitter or here on Zoom, please, throw it in the comment, in the chat section here, or tweet with the hashtag #AIRA, and we'll do our best over the next 11.5 minutes to get the panelists to respond to the questions. And I'll start with the first one here. There's a question about AIRA's key priorities for the next year or so. If Edwin doesn't mind, you're an OG and a member of AIRA. What are some of the things you want people to go away with as the key priorities that we're looking at for the next year or so?
The aim of AIRA in this coming year and for years to come, of course, is to grow the alliance and have as wide a reach as possible. It's also to ensure that digital rights are guarded in all spaces and to seal all the loopholes of mass surveillance, of stalking, of harassment, as well as, can you still hear me? Can you hear me?
It's breaking a bit, but we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay, my speaker seems to be me a problem. It's also to safeguard those digital rights spaces and to ensure that going forward, we are not fighting this battle of ensuring that governments kind of limit their harassment of people online, but also to ensure that there is as much reach as possible digitally. To bridge the gaps, there is so much of a discrepancy between the haves and the have-nots as far as digital coverage is concerned. And this also then goes to the economic disparities, it also goes to the educational disparities. Because, for example, as a child myself, I studied in a village, and I found that as I went to the city, there was a huge disparity, a huge discordance between me and the kids in the city. They already had TVs, I started seeing black and white TVs when I was in my teens and stuff like that. And of course, that affects you no matter how intelligent or how much potential you have. If you don't have access to digital rights, it kind of it clouds everything that you have potential on. So I think AIRA is going to be working much on that to bridge the disparities while also mindful of the fact that they protect and litigate and advocate against any digital rights abuses.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Edwin. Speaking of disparities, there's a question here about how grassroots movements and community-based organizations who are mostly working with unconnected people, how they can be part of, this strategic alliance, AIRA, or any other alliance on the continent that is working towards on digital rights. And I'll come to you on this one, Koliwe. How do people who are working with on the unconnected population in Africa, how do they jump on this digital rights train that various collaboration opportunities are going to be looking at?
I think we spoke about it a little earlier when we were saying that it's important for us to look at the basket of stakeholders and to understand how each community member who may not be connected because they don't have a mobile device or they don't have, a reliable connection can be part of the conversation. So I'll share the experience a few years ago working with the media in Africa, the Zimbabwean chapter. And one of the target groups that we worked with were the community-based organizations. Because I think there's a misconception that if you are working in a rural community, there's zero connect. Identify opinion leaders or people who actually, or who became central in terms of the connectivity central point. You remember how our parents in the rural areas, you always had one family that either had a television set or a radio, and then everyone convened there to get information from there. If they didn't go there, they relied on this person as an opinion leader. So it's identifying within the communities. And I know in rural Africa is very difficult because of the traditional leadership that we have. And if you come from a context like mine in Zimbabwe, there's also the politics of which political party the representative in parliament is from. But I think that a conversation on digital rights is appropriate at any level. And the way to deal with it is to identify communities of influence or organizations of influence within the specific communities, raise awareness, firstly, because the thing is, you can't just walk in there and start speaking about digital rights without actually understanding first what the main agenda of that community-based organization is. If it's around agricultural, productivity, or a women's club, women's knitting club, what you need to understand also is their trends of use. So what is also important before you do or undertake any interventions with community-based organizations is have a baseline to understand the community itself and their patterns of use of the internet. Who has access to the internet? How often? Is there electricity there? What are the alternatives that are there? Has there been any violence, domestic violence because of trends of use of the mobile phone or connecting to the internet? So it requires a lot of groundwork, but it also requires that you acknowledge that once you get into the community, as much as you are I saw one of the comments says it's good to be here and seeing the heavyweights, Sipesa and Paradigm. So even if you are a heavyweight within the digital community, once you decide to work with the community-based organization, they are in the forefront in terms of the language, in terms of dictating to you the protocol of how you get into that community. Can you have meetings, community meetings with men and women on the same day? Do you need to go there on a particular day? What are the sensitivities politically that you cannot use as an example when you articulate some of the issues? So it's difficult because it's a contextual campaign, but it's achievable as long as you're willing to collaborate sincerely with the community-based organizations.
Thank you, Koliwe. Building on grassroots-based organizations and rural communities, there's a question on Twitter, and it is, do digital rights matter to individuals who don't own devices or don't know how to use the web? The question is from, apologies if I mispronounce, H. Adebisi.
Can I answer that?
Oh, yes, go ahead, Adrian.
Oh yes, they do matter, absolutely. If you realize, even if you don't have a device or have a computer, there'll be sometimes where you have to go somewhere and your details are taken down and you don't know where that person is going to store that information about you, maybe your health issues or your health records or whatever, or you make calls using normal what do you call landlines. You don't know if that conversation is being recorded, or facial recognition technologies where you go to a mall and your image is taken by those the technologies that are now all over, even here in South Africa, everywhere. That affects you. And if somebody gets hold of that or is stored in a way without any safeguards in place, that is definitely going to affect your own privacy and what people know about you. That's something they have no business knowing about you. So they are very much pertinent to every single person, whether you've got a device or not. And even if you don't have a device, one day you will have a device. There is no law that says if you don't have a device now, you'll never have a device in your life. It's not a case not to have a device now. I think we all hope one day everybody will have a device. So we must safeguard the rights now, even for those who have devices in the future.
Thank you, Edwin. And even if you don't have a device within your household, someone has a device, and as they say, the weakest link, principle then applies there. Let me come to you, Onyeko, on this question about the private sector. It says now I see that AIRA is only made up of CSOs, civil society organizations. Will the private sector entities be allowed into the alliance in the future?
So Co-Creation Hub isn't a CSO, we're social enterprise. We make money, we make profits, we pay people, we pay developers, we hire all sorts of people. So we're like a normal business. We just have a very social outlook. And so just by CC Hub being in the alliance, yes, we are going to have private sector entities as long as your vision and mission aligns with ours. We don't discriminate. And there's a place, as I've said, there's a place for the private sector in that. There's a perspective that the private sector will bring that are also very important to digital rights. So yes, my answer to that is yes.
Thank you, Onyeko. You're right. The vision and the mission, are the center of participation within the alliance. And I'm looking here. I don't see any particular question, but in honor of that, thing that we do every time when we're in physical meetings, where we have a standing mic somewhere and people can walk to the microphone. I would have wanted us to do that, but guess what? It's virtual, so people don't have to wait to go to the mic. They've been asking questions here, and I just see a long one coming in. Oh, okay, but it's not a question. So it's just a comment, and I just want to thank everyone, but at this point, I'd like to hand over to Ashna because I don't see any other questions here. Ashna.
Thank you so much, Benga. Thank you so much, panelists. Thank you so much, audience participation, both here on Zoom and via Twitter, for attending and participating. As has been shared in the chat previously, please follow AIRA on Twitter, Facebook, and LinkedIn to learn more about us and also collaborate with us. Also, our webpage is AIRA. Since this is the last session, of the 2020 Forum on Internet Freedom in Africa, I would also like to send a special thank you message to our other wider alliance and collaborators in making this forum a success. Those include SRT, the Sigrid Rossing Trust, SIDA, the Swedish International Development Corporation Agency, the Omidyar Network, GIZ, the German Corporation Agency, Facebook, SIPE, which is the Center for International Private Enterprise, Ford Foundation as well. Over the past 3 days, we have hosted remote hubs in 5 countries, here in Uganda, in Kampala. We've hosted one in Dakar, Senegal, in collaboration with Junction. Another has been held in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, in partnership with Zaina Foundation. The Digital Security Group, which is based in Kinshasa, DR Congo, has also hosted a session. And lastly, Action et Humanism, which hosted a hub in Abidjan, Ivory Coast. Digital security support has been available throughout the forum with the help and support of dedicated volunteers and individuals working with the Defenders Protection Initiative, Access Now, the Digital Security Group, Green Hosts, Defend Defenders. We've also had collaboration and support with the Africa Freedom of Expression Exchange, AFEX, Data for Change, Global Voices. Thank you all so much. If I've missed out anyone, thank you for the collaboration and partnership. Thank you to AIRA. And last but not least, my co-host, Benga, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure hosting this forum with Paradigm Initiative and this session, of course. Thank you all, take care, and we'll see you soon.
Thank you, Ashna. So this definitely officially marks the end of our session, and like Ashna, rightfully, and of course, if anyone has the right power to say that, that's above my pay grade. She's officially declared, FIFA FIFAfrica20 over, but just to say that our panelists will remain available for a few minutes for follow-up questions from journalists in attendance or any questions from other FIFA Africa attendees. Thank you, everyone. Eshe pupo, asante sana, merci beaucoup, dalu. I'm looking for, come on, help me with the Zulu, with the, Shona, with everything. Thank you very much, everyone. And of course, thank you to my amazing co-host, Ashna, and to everyone else. Have a wonderful, wonderful evening and enjoy the rest of your week.
Thank you. Bye. See you all next year.
You can unmute your mic now and say thank you and bye-bye in your language. I see,
bye-bye, Carbonana and Mumatati. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay.
So our speakers will remain to be able to speak to the journalists, and if there are other questions from attendees. Thanks, Edwin. Okay, I was going to ask if Edwin left. I thought it was only...
Now it's time to rise up, to engage your...
So you guys don't know this side of me, but this is DJ GS on the beat.